You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey everybody, welcome to Modern Musicology. I am Rob Levy, and we are super excited to be back for another show with you. I am joined by the incomparable Alan Seiler. Hello, Alan.
What's up, everybody?
And also super drummer and all-around cool cat, Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, everyone.
And today we are super excited because we are joined by Daniel Rachel. Daniel wrote his first song when he was 16 and was the lead singer in Rachel's Basement. He's a Birmingham-based best-selling author who has written a lot of really great books, including Isle of Noises, Conversations with Great British Songwriters, Walls Come Tumbling Down, The Music and Politics of Rock Against Racism, Two Tone and Red Wedge, Don't Look Back in Anger, The Rise and Fall of Cool Britannia. And this one is one of my favorites, The Lost Album of the Beatles, What If the Beatles Hadn't Split Up? One for the Road, the life and lyrics of Simon Fowler and Ocean Color Scene, also Oasis Nebworth, Two Nights That Will Live Forever, and he is also a co-writer for Rankin Rogers' autobiography, I Just Can't Stop It, My Life in the Beat. He's a regular with BBC5, and his latest book, which is fantastic, Too Much, Too Young, the two-tone record story, Rude Boys, Racism, and the Soundtrack of a Generation, has garnered praise from loads of places. It's a Blitzed Magazine Book of the Year, a Louder Than War Book of the Year, long listed for the Penderyn Music Prize, an Uncut Book of the Year, and a Times Sunday Book of the Year. And I am exhausted saying all the places that it has been Book of the Year. And he just literally got off of his private jet from Italy to join us. So here we are. Thank you, Daniel, for being on the show today.
Grazie mille. Mi chiamo Daniela.
That's a spicy meatball.
Come stai?
So,
parli italiano? Sì.
No. Mm-hmm.
No, we're going to have a difficult time.
Our first bilingual episode.
Yeah, if we do an entire episode of
Due, quattro, the Marx Brothers, Hoppo, Chico, Groucho.
Oh gosh.
I'll have the pasta primavera with the anchovies. Can you talk about how you discovered Two Tone Records and sort of how that journey led from you being a consumer of these records to somebody who wrote about them and gets to play their records in Italy?
I like the bit about my private jet. Yeah, I borrowed it from Elton John. He's a neighbour in North London, you know.
Oh wow,
Cool.
No, I mean, I first heard Two Tone on British radio, BBC Radio 1, when I was a kid. It was on television, on Top of the Pops, you know, a program that would be watched by 20 million kids like me. And I saw it in the glossy magazines like Smash Hits. And all of those things just got me super excited by the sound, by the look of the band. And one minute you looked across the playground and everybody was wearing green and was into the Jam and was a mod. And then you looked across the other way and suddenly we were all rude boys and rude girls because our uniform was black and white. And it was, you were immediately part of the gang. But that passion, that love of the music has never left me. And I kind of grew up with it, and it's there. It's in my record collection. It's defined me probably most of all because as I grew older, the social and political content of the records informed me in a way I realized that my comprehensive education was not. You know, this was the first place that I learned about Nelson Mandela and apartheid in South Africa. School did not teach me that. I learned about racism, and that was not taught in school. And I learned about sexual abuse and rape That was not taught about in school, but all of these issues were prevalent within the lyricism of two-tone artists. And as I say, I realized they gave me an education.
I agree. I feel like I learned about pretty much all that too in the same way, especially like apartheid and with Nelson Mandela, same way. But I have a question about this book because first of all, it's like over 500 pages. So there's so much chock full of information about it. But I want to know, how did you choose what to keep in and what to cut out? How many hours did you not include of interviews and stuff? I mean, there must just be like endless. You could probably write another book, right?
Yeah, the boring bits. Yeah, I met nearly 100 people, and the importance of that was to try and talk to as many people in each of the bands. And of course, most two-tone bands have got minimum of 7 members. And then there's the immediate people who are running two-tone records in Coventry and in London, and then the greater record label around Chrysalis, the PRs, and all it spirals out until you get to Two-Tone Tess, who ran the Two-Tone fan club. And I felt it was important to get all of those stories. I'm trying to tell the story of Two-Tone Records from its inception inside the mind of Jerry Dammers. And I follow Jerry, and if somebody is contributing to that story and is providing us with insight into Jerry, into what is Two-Tone Records, then I wanted to include those stories. I also make it a habit to make sure that women are part of the story. I was told just yesterday in Italy, of all places, that when they looked up two-tone on Wikipedia, there's no mention of a woman called Juliet DeVee Wills, which is astonishing, because Juliet not only managed the Selector, she also co-ran the two-tone office in London. So hugely important, a person of incredible intelligence and stories. She had never contributed to the two-tone story. So I was thrilled that she was involved. And within the book, I must say I have a bias towards women's voices, because I think so. I elevate those within the story for sure, just so that it's not a male fest.
Yes, no, I really appreciated that.
And I was wondering too, the process for interviews, did it just sort of all fall together into place, or did you have to really, really track some people down? And how willing were people to talk to you about this?
The willingness is interesting, because I've now come to think that there's many of the musicians within two-tone are able to talk about their experiences, but they also guard the inner core of that, what they went through, with a kind of a shell, and that shell protects them from what the kind of the negative experience. So if you talk to Jerry Dammers, you can talk about him writing Ghost Town, or you can talk to Roddy about playing guitar on Ghost Town. But if you push a little bit further, you realize that these people were having forms of mental breakdowns, nervous breakdowns at the time that they were making these records. And that shell I talked about is a protection for them in the modern day, that they don't have to revisit the trauma of what they experienced at the time. The same would be said of the 7 members of the Bodysnatchers. The same would be said of many of the members of the Selector, where they protect this trauma. But of course, being the kind of person I am, which is I always want to find out about people. I'm interested by people. I guess I keep on asking, or I shut up and listen. And as a result, I was inviting them back into the trauma. And that then was very difficult, because there's a resistance, and a resistance to them wanting to step back in, a resistance to me asking the questions, a resistance to them wanting those stories in the book. I can happily say for the reader that you get to read these stories, but no, it wasn't easy for many of these people. And I think that's also part of the reason why a handful of people would not talk to me, because it's too difficult. Now, why have these people got these problems? Well, because at the beginning, two-tone is a sensational thrusting into the mainstream of music, and takes over the British landscape, and to a lesser degree in North America and in Europe. But then, with the success brings its own kind of troubles. It exacerbates your personalities, whatever they were before. If you like to drink, you drink more. If you're attracted to drugs, you snort more. If, you know, whatever your vices are, they get exacerbated. And I think those are the reasons why many of the two-tone bands and the artists collapse on themselves as the story progresses.
I would want to ask you about the timing of everything, because in the book, I think it says like the peak was, you know, really just 18 months, pretty much from like 79 to 81. There was like a very short like explosion. But I mean, I remember, and yes, I listened to all those bands in high school, but then in my late teens and my early 20s, I mean, for sure, like the New York scene, now every listener can now take a drink, because I am going to mention Danceteria. We have a little in joke. Take your shot, but
Definitely, you never disappoint me.
But I mean, there's bands like the Toasters, Unity 2, Beat Brigade. Like there were so many shows that I used to go to that was, you know, like I was saying, in my late teens, early 20s. So I feel like that wave, at least in the States and maybe in smaller niches, not like a huge national movement, I feel like it went on. And then even down the line, like third wave ska, like Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, No Doubt, like that whole kind of third wave even. So was it like that in England, or I mean, it seems like it was like that here. Was it like that there? That there was just a continuation, even though you said that was just like a very little explosion for a few short years.
I don't know what the in-joke is about the Danceteria, but it is the venue where Rankin
Because I
Roger
mention
met
it all
Madonna.
the time. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
I mention it all the time because I like basically lived there when I was, you know, a teenager to my early 20s or teenager, really.
So then when Madonna came over to England to do her first public appearances for Borderline, Roger met up again with Madonna. And they had a little dalliance, and there's a fantastic photograph of the two of them together. And when I wrote the book with Roger, by the time it was published, it was he died. But Madonna was playing at the was doing about 50 million dates at a little theatre in London, and I thought I'd go down and give her the book. And it didn't occur to me that it's quite hard to get through the security of Madonna. But I managed to sneak in. I managed to sneak into the backstage. And then I said, I bought a little book because there's a photograph of Madonna with Roger. And I think they had an important little relationship to one another. And I was told that any gifts from Madonna are automatically put into this bin over here in the corner. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. So I said, if I give you this book now, you will put it straight into the bin. He said, yes. I said, well, I've written a letter for her. I've showed her the photograph. If she wants to have a look, and if this is just a ruse, then please give her that. I handed over the book and they chucked it in the bin.
How terrible.
So I thought that's funny. I don't mind. I mean, Madonna did Vogue and Justify My Love. So as far as I'm concerned, she was good for that. But in Britain, no, I mean, I didn't get any qualifications at school. I mean, but my math says two-tone really lasted 2 years. It was the summer of 79 to the summer of 81. And then it's regenerated through particularly the Nelson Mandela and what comes around that in 1984, 1985, and at the end of the 80s. But for that 2-year period, two-tone swept the nation without a doubt. I mean, it was the youth clothing. It was the clothing on the high street in the centre of London. It was across all of the radio, of television, of magazines. The songs were going to number one. If they weren't going to number one, they were selling 250,000, 500,000 copies. It was absolutely huge. And then the bands that began on two-tone, like The Beat and Madness, even though they went into, formed their own record labels or signed elsewhere, then went on to even bigger things, you know, like Madness became the most successful singles band in the UK in the 1980s. And then kind of within the fraternity of Two Tone, UB40 became the most successful reggae band in the world. And bands like Bad Manners, huge hits, Dexys Midnight Runners. So the whole thing that grew out of Two Tone was really, really important and big. And it wasn't, I mean, oddly enough, I never, until I did this book, I'd never heard of the second wave of ska. That's not a thing that's ever spoken by Brits as a phrase. We just had Two Tone, and Two Tone was British ska. It wasn't anything else.
And you mentioned something interesting too, like you saw mods on one side, and then there was like the Two Tone kids on the other side. But like, I also feel like in the States, and maybe this happened after a little while, but there was very much of a melding of mod scene, ska scene, reggae scene. I mean, you went to a show and you saw all those kids. Like I kind of felt like I didn't never know which way to dress, like for which show, because you could do all of it. So
I mean, I can't speak for other cities, but in Birmingham, where I grew up, then I would never tell somebody that I like the Jam and like I was strictly a rude boy, not a mod. But I don't know if that's the case in other places. But the irony is that you're absolutely right, that two-tone music has the same influences as 60s mod. And Jerry Dammers would describe himself as a mini mod when he was like 12 and into the Who. So he probably couldn't afford good shoes and a parka with the Who on the back. So he was just a mini mod. So I quite like that. But the influences are very, very similar. And if you buy all mod cons by the Jam, their third album, the inner sleeve has got a picture of This Is Ska record. And so it was an overlapping thing. But because of the nature of tribal groups in Britain, from the Beatles onwards, you had to choose your tribe, and you dressed accordingly. But the interesting thing, I think, at two-tone gigs is you would get rudies, you would get mods, you would get hippies, you would get punks, you may even get some rockers. There was a definite mixing together of various different people. But interestingly enough, my argument is that the first rude girl was Pauline Black. I don't think there's a Jamaican rude girl, to my knowledge, and I think by dint of her fronting the first two-tone band as a woman and how she dressed makes her the first rude girl.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think she's really been overlooked, sort of, right? We talk about Debbie Harry, we talk about Susie, we talk about a lot of these other female artists making music at the time, and your book really does a fantastic job of bringing her sort of back into the spotlight, so to speak, right? Because at this particular time, the British music scene is not particularly great to navigate for women artists, much less ones in bands.
Yeah, I mean, there was a famous front cover in Britain in early 1980, I think, where there was Debbie Harry, Susie Sue, a member of the Slits, X-Ray Specs, and Pauline is part of that photograph on the front cover. It's a strange one because they weren't super successful, the Selector, and I think over time their reputation has grown and they've become more important and more significant. But within that short period of time that the original Selector existed, which is no more than 11 months, really. I mean, they form in July 79, literally because the name exists on the B-side of Gangsters. There's a song called Selector by a fictitious group called Selector. And then this group say, we will become the Selector. And then by the summer of 1980, that group has split up. But, just recently, there has been a 90-minute film of Pauline Black's life and the story of Two-Tone. And that's proving to be hugely successful. And it's a adaptation of her book, and which came out maybe 10 years ago. And so the weight of knowledge about Pauline is increasing to such the extent that fairly recently she was honoured by the royal family. She got an OBE, and so I think she was presented to that by Prince Charles, I think. And when there was a two-tone exhibition, when Coventry was declared City of Culture in 2021. Then she showed around King Charles and now Queen Camilla around the exhibition. So that again shows the kind of reverence the status she has. But what was really interesting is apparently when our now King Charles was seeing the two-tone exhibition, like 7-8 rooms, it was a massive thing. That he said, he asked Pauline, is this a form of soul music? He didn't know, but Camilla did know. Yeah. But it was funny for me because I was the guest curator for the exhibition, and I'd put in lots of my stuff in there, like memorabilia, scarves and records. And so it's quite funny to think that the King and Queen of England have been looking at my scarf.
That's wild. And doesn't King Charles now have doesn't King Charles have like a radio show? He could play it now.
He's just done a podcast, hasn't he, about his favorite songs, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard it?
Just
Not yet. You're going to investigate, are you, Rob?
Well, yeah, I've got a lot to invest. There's so much stuff coming out right now that it's obnoxious.
Is it true God Save the Queen's on it?
I don't know. I didn't get
that
far.
That's amazing.
The Pistols, or it was either God Save the Queen or Belson as a Gas, I think. I can't remember.
One of the things that I love about Two-Tone is that not only has the music survived, right, but it is probably, unlike some of these other labels that are floating around at the time, like Rough Trade or Creation or things that happen, its label has an identity that you instantly see the logo and you know exactly what it is and where it sounds. And that's like, 40, 50 years on, you still know when you see something with that sort of imagery, sort of what it is. And it's a really great example in a short amount of time, I know, but of like the label having the music visuals and the music and the photographs, everything all forming one giant package. And I think that's one of the really great things about Two-Tone that sort of brought me to it when I was young and impressionable, is I could just like, oh, it's a Two-Tone record, boom, grab it. I don't even have to know anything about it, just grab it.
Yeah, I mean, that you have to hand that to the artists within Two-Tone. So, for example, in the Bodysnatchers, it was Sarah Jane and Penny who designed the logo, the Bodysnatchers, and the hand. And in the specials, the design work was Jerry, because he'd been to art school, and to a lesser degree Horace Panther, the bass player. And the original idea of Jerry was taken from Motown, and the home of in Detroit, and the car city. And there's a parallel that I make in the book about Coventry also being a motor city, the home of Daimler and Jaguar. And Jerry, in the same way as when you hear a Motown song, and from the first crack of the snare, whether it's a Marvin Gaye record or Diana Ross, you know it's Motown. When Jerry wanted a Two-Tone song to have the same idea, that when you hear that drum beginning or a guitar, you know this is the sound of a Two-Tone record. And so that's all part of the vision. And I think that yeah, you're absolutely right. It was very, very exciting.
Talking about how DIY the whole thing was, because everybody did their own, contributed to that. And then, then the specials get the buzz going, and they got courted by a lot of labels, and they eventually signed to such an unconventional record deal with Chrysalis. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of a deal where a band gets signed, they have a label, subsidiary label, that basically the major label's backing, but they have free reign to do whatever they want with that label. And I mean, I know that the band didn't get as much money themselves for that deal, and maybe that was a little bit, what are you going to do, I guess? But I think that it was just, they just retained such creative control that I thought that was such an important part of that whole movement too.
No, absolutely. I mean, Jerry insisted that if you sign the specials, you sign a concept called two-tone, and two-tone retains total artistic control. And so Jerry was saying, we will bring to you other bands that have the same kind of sound and attitude as us. And you know, when Mick Jagger tries to sign the specials, to Rolling Stones Records, he doesn't get the concept, so he doesn't get the deal. Yeah, Richard Branson tried to sign for Virgin, but his answer was to offer a packet of money underneath the table. I'll double whatever the last man said, and so he doesn't get the deal. And but they signed to Chrysalis, and you're absolutely right. If you compare the specials deal to the Clash or the Sex Pistols, they take a mighty cut in their advance. But I think the interesting part of that artistic freedom is, yes, they get to sign who they want to, and they get to decide all the visuals, as you just spoke about, Rob. But that only applies to the UK. And so when you find two-tone releases in Europe and in North America, they don't carry the design that we had. And for example, the Chrysalis butterfly and the Chrysalis logo is stamped across all the imagery, and you don't necessarily get the paper bag with the two-tone man on it and the paper sleeve that we got. And I think that was to the frustration of the musicians. But the brilliant thing is, originally, you know, when you know, the record Chrysalis, of course, said, we love the idea, we're going to sign you. So who are all these other bands that you're going to bring to us? And Jerry, who's got a very particular way of speaking, I don't know, I've got absolutely no idea. And he has to then discover these bands. But he'd had a meeting with Suggs from Madness in North London, and the specials had just played to like 25 people in a sleazy downstairs bar, and Jerry has no front teeth and hasn't got anywhere to sleep for the night. And he says to Suggs from Madness, I'm going to start a record label. It's going to be like Motown. Will you be on it? And Suggs is going, Jerry, I've just seen you play to 20 people. You haven't got any teeth. You've got nowhere to sleep. What are you talking about? And of course, 3 months later, it becomes a reality. It's quite incredible that Jerry drives that agenda. He presents in one way, and he's quite capable of pulling something off in quite another.
Since you talked about the difference in the way that these records are marketed in the UK and in America, you mentioned earlier about Madness being the most successful singles band in the UK, and basically they had one hit in the US. And that has happened with a number of other bands that you mentioned later on, Dexys and UB40. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that Madness never really hit here the same way that they did everywhere else in the world?
Yeah, it's difficult to know, because Madness were the first band to arrive in the US, and they played, you know, on bills with the Go-Go's, and they were they did a big tour, and it doesn't quite happen, does it? You know, and the specials come over. Debbie Harry introduces them in Long Island. And they get the, you know, people like Iggy Pop go and see them play, and Mick Jagger, and they're getting the you know, big names coming and talking about these acts. You know, I'm aware that Our House is the one hit wonder with It Must Be Love slightly underneath that. Yeah, it's difficult to fathom. Maybe they didn't, you know, it's hard. I guess it's that time honored thing where bands succeed in their home country, and then they're knocked down quite a lot of pegs when they come to the US and almost have to start again. And rather than tour the country in 6 weeks, you know, it takes 6 months, and then you have to come straight back to North America and do it all again. And a lot of bands aren't prepared to do that. They get homesick. But musically wise, I'm slightly baffled by that. I mean, yes, you could say it was something to do with the marketing, because, you know, you look at the initial marketing for Two Tone when they put together the Selector, I think, and specials, and they play the US advertising plays to a comedy element of it. That this is a frivolous kind of a music. I don't know if that therefore applies to Madness, because they're on Stiff Records by the time they really try in the States. I don't know in saying that, because even a few months ago, I was speaking to Bedders, the bass player of Madness, and they'd just come and done a tour on the West Coast, and then they did the East Coast. And I was saying, what kind of audiences were you playing to? And he said, oh, about 5. And I said, what, 500? And he said, no, 5,000. And then at some other venues, they would play to 10,000. This was only last year. Now, if you're playing to 5,000 and 10,000 people here in the UK, that means you're really successful. But you're saying one hit wonder, and they're playing to that size venue. So that baffles me. I don't understand America in that way, I'm afraid.
I think the big thing with two-tone is that it really hit in America through independent and college radio, right? Because they really wanted something. And at this particular time, college radio is pretty much white and male, right?
Right.
And it allows them to sort of play other styles of music that sort of fit in that sort of niche. And then that sort of opens the door for people getting reggae shows and calypso shows and like all this new stuff. So it did open some doors, but it was sort of like they were always sort of like an indie or college band. And a lot of people misunderstood, I think, what two-tone was. I think they thought, oh, it's punk, or it's, they're just sort of labeling anything coming out of England at the time. And I think it was just really hard to get that sort of American label that we like to put on everything, right? We like to stamp everything with one label and that's it. And a lot of this stuff is so broad that the palette doesn't really work.
We also have to remind ourselves, of how well is the Jamaican influence or the Caribbean influence on popular music in the States at this time. So, you think of when John Lennon was on the Mike Douglas show in, I think, 1975, perhaps. And Mike Douglas said to Lennon, what are you listening to at the moment? And he says, reggae. And Mike Douglas says, what's that? And John Lennon has to describe what reggae is. So then in 1980 on Broadway, they open up the musical called, it's not called reggae, is it called Babylon? Oh God, I've forgotten what it's called. It's in the book as well. But anyway, it's on Broadway and it closes after about 2 or 3 weeks. It just has no impact whatsoever. So this offbeat style that these bands are coming with is a comedy alien sound to the American ears. But I counter that by saying that I've heard quite a lot of bootlegs of the specials and Madness on their first tours in the States, and the people that were in those clubs of however many hundred really, really get it. And the specials were doing 5 and 6 encores. And then, the very last tour the specials did of North America in what you call fall 81, when they are supporting the Police and they're opening to 30,000 people. And then later the Beat will play 2 US festivals, weren't they? And that's 500,000 people.
Right.
So,
right.
And you can see, you can watch that on YouTube when the Beat play one or maybe even both of them, and the response to them is magnificent. And then the Beat would later, play places like Red Rocks, and REM opened for the Beat and such bands like that. So something was beginning to happen. It was maybe a slow burner, whether Madness just chose not to really go for it, but I think it was beginning to happen. I mean, Roger thought that with the Beat, that had they done the 4th album, that would have really cemented their reputation and a crossover in the way that maybe the first couple of singles for general public really hit in the US. And Tenderness was a massive hit for you, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. To be fair, I'm going to go back to 1975. Even if reggae was the biggest thing happening in America at that time, Mike Douglas still would not have known reggae. He was not the hippest dude. I just want to say.
That's
okay, well, that helps. And there's poor John. Let me tell you about reggae.
But what Alan said is interesting, and what you're talking about is something that, did they had one hit? See, in my mind, and maybe this goes back to the club of 100 or 200 people, like I was at that club, right? So to me, One Step Beyond was a huge hit, and
That's
so
true. One
and
Step
all
Beyond
these,
did get a lot of play.
yeah. Plus,
It
it
wasn't
was
like
on
a top
MTV.
40
really?
hit or anything, but yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
and
more
then,
college
on
radio.
the video programs, like not
Right.
necessarily as much MTV, but like Friday night videos, which was
Right.
a thing here, a syndicated thing. It did get a lot of play there.
Ah.
Exactly.
Which venue did you go to, Stephanie?
a lot of clubs, like I said, Danceteria, Take a Drink,
Danceteria.
people.
No, but where you saw Madness or Specials?
Oh, up the Pier. That was the Pier, which is like a outside venue on the west side of the city. It's literally a
city?
pier. New York. Sorry, New York City. You're like the
Okay,
city,
right. The city.
Come on.
When you
The
talk about
city that matters.
the city in England, I mean, it can only be London. Come on.
Right.
So horrible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The other thing too,
I did an event in New York in the summer.
yeah,
Oh, really?
I was at Rough Trade
Oh.
on 42nd. Off 42nd.
On 42nd. There you go.
there you go.
You know Rough Trade there? Yeah.
Yeah,
In the,
yeah.
isn't it underneath the venue where the two-tone bands first played on Saturday Night Live, where the Specials played?
Yes.
Is it
Oh,
underneath?
yeah.
Yeah, I did a 12-day tour of the States. I went from Los Angeles all the way across to New York. I drove
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
my
Wow.
gosh.
Well,
What year?
yeah.
When was this?
last summer in
It
August.
was last summer.
August,
All right.
September.
Next time you come to the States, you have to let us know, and we'll come.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the middle.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't get. I'm in St. Louis, so I couldn't.
Whereabouts are you, Rob?
I'm in St. Louis.
Oh, I didn't come to St. Louis. Sorry.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Had you
It's
ever-
very old business, St. Louis to Liverpool.
Yes.
Had you ever driven on the wrong side of the road before then?
Oh yeah, frequently do that in London.
Oh, well, okay.
Just give me a beer.
So I wanted to ask you too, just as a writer standpoint, right? You've written about lots of other different types of musical styles and musical stuff going on, like the Oasis book, and you're talking about Britpop and things. None of those sort of touch on some of the themes in this book. I'm guessing, and if I'm wrong, just slap me and tell me I'm stupid. But you're writing about this music that you're passionate about, but then you also sort of have to write about the social and economic climates of the time, and then also touch upon racism and post-war Britain and how this is a sort of generational thing. And this is a lot more culturally than just a band in their story or a label in their story. How did you sort of handle that aspect of writing the book?
Yeah, no, great. I mean, in fact, the book I wrote about Cool Britannia in the 90s, again, it was really important to look at the social and political climate that underpinned what the 90s was in the UK. So that's why, for example, I spoke to Prime Minister John Major and Prime Minister Tony Blair, and then apparatchiks underneath them, to kind of broaden out the scope of that story. And in the same way, I try to do that with most books that I write. I'm kind of fascinated by the politics and the social issues behind it, and even to a lesser extent with Oasis at Nebworth, because that was a cultural movement, but that was a picture book more than anything, really. And Walls Come Tumbling Down, which is about rock against racism. It's impossible not to. But in the two-tone story, to my mind, unless you contextualize where this comes from, then it makes no sense. And where that comes from is a divided Britain, where for the first time, this is why the story starts with the bombing of Coventry by the Luftwaffe during the Second World War, and the rebuilding of Coventry, firstly as a motor city, which then goes into decline, and because of British recession in the late 60s, early 70s, and the revival of Coventry, of that city, comes from music, from culture. And why has Two Tone started? Why is Jerry Dammers doing it? It's because the kids, the people that were invited back to the motherland from the Caribbean islands to rebuild Britain at the end of the war, then they came to the motherland and settled. And then the first and second generation kids grow up with English white kids, British white kids. They go to the same schools, they go to the same youth clubs. And so there's a mingling of culture where you admire one another's clothes, their music. So by the time these kids pick up instruments in the mid 1970s, they have a hybrid understanding of one another's music. So it's very natural that a white kid might start playing an offbeat guitar. It's very natural for a black kid to start putting maybe a kind of jangle that they've picked up off a Small Faces or a Who record. But at the same time, you get the counter to that, which is people saying, we want to keep Britain white. We don't want these black people in our country. We want them to go back to wherever they've come from, even though they've been born in Britain. So you get the rise of national parties like the National Front, the British movement, the equivalent of America First, the equivalent of Jean-Marie Le Pen and Marie Le Pen in France, and on the streets of Britain in this mid 70s period, late 70s, early 80s, you've literally got that confrontation being fought out with bottles and fists. And what Two Tone is saying, it's recognizing that there is a youth and a generation that could go either way. They could go towards the neo-Nazis and the fascists, or they could go to culture and music as something positive. And this music is the place to decide. And it literally is, because people come into the dance floor wanting to dance and embrace the clothes and love the music made by this hybrid of different people. But into the dance hall also come the neo-Nazis and the National Front, oddly enough, because they enjoy the rhythms of what Two Tone is, which is not just Jamaican and Caribbean island culture. It's also the rhythm of disco and the rhythm of funk, and it's the elements of rock, and it's the element of punk. But so it's all happening on the dance floor, and as you can imagine, that becomes very violent, and that becomes a major part of the Two Tone story, where knives are pulled out. Sieg Heiling, you see Sieg Heiling at many concerts, and you have sharpened coins that are thrown at the black members of the bands. You have blatant sexism, blatant misogyny. The ills of society are being met or are being represented in a microcosm in Two Tone, largely because the lyricism of these bands is reflecting what is happening on the streets. And it's really fascinating to see how that plays out. And at the same time, although many of the first Two Tone records and the first British ska records were written whilst we had a socialist Labour government, by the time that the records are successful and the bands become the dominant force in British music, we have the first years of the Conservative government and the Thatcher experiment, which is not dissimilar to Reaganomics. And so we have recession, we have unemployment, we have a racist police force that are taking out whatever they want to on the black population, largely. And as a result, we have songs that address that directly. If it doesn't make it all right by the Specials, we have The Boiler by the Bodysnatchers, which talks about male violence and rape. We have Racist Friend by the Special AKA. We have Free Nelson Mandela by the Special AKA. All the songs are telling us what life is. We have Embarrassment by Madness, which is about a kid who's been born to a mixed race family, and the family disown the mother, but it's put to a Motown beat, it's put to a ska beat, it's put to a rock beat, and everything's hybrid, everything's a contradiction, but everything is indelibly wrapped up that they can't be pulled apart. You have to explore every angle of it, and I hope that I've in some way been able to convey that in Too Much Too Young.
I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning of our show, and this kind of follows along from what you've just talked about when you first got into the two-tone scene, the records, about hearing social truths that you had never been taught in school. And I think for a lot of people, particularly in America, that's what rap did. And I kind of want to hear you talk a little bit about the parallel between the two-tone scene in the UK and what we experience here with these rap records that really were in your face with social truths that white America would never be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, what was shocking to me when I toured across the States was the amount of times that I heard people tell me that we haven't got a history like you have. You know, American history is not at all as old. And I would say, well, what about Native American history? And people, well, that's something else, as if history starts in 1780, you know, or something. And it's like, I found that quite surprising. But at the same time, I would point the finger at my own country, because we were educated about the British Empire, and that was something very positive that we were told. We weren't told about the atrocities in India. We weren't told about, I still don't really know about the British role in North America. It's, you know, and this is a disgrace to, you know, we as Brits are told to believe that we are a magnificent, innocent nation that police and controlled the world because we know how the world should be. But this simply is not the education that I've come to realize that I should have been taught about. But I think that these are kind of big, broad issues. But as you might have picked up on already, I think that there's more simpler issues at play. That the you know, half of the British population are women, but women are treated as second-class citizens, and they are a minority. And part of the two-tone message through Pauline Black, through Rhoda Dakar, through the Bodysnatchers, was to talk also about these issues. I don't think that was as successful, and certainly in school, nobody ever talked about, you know, the rights of women, you know, or what abortion meant, and you know, and these are issues that are so important in today's story, aren't they? You know, and particularly since we now have a Trump government, that's come to the fore once again. And in many ways, two-tone, I think I was too young to get it at the time, but it raised awareness. That was the most important thing. I suddenly would look on my wall, and I didn't think of the fact that there was a woman on my wall. Not a set. It wasn't Debbie Harry looking beautiful. It was, you know, with maybe suggestive clothing on. It was Pauline Black looking beautiful with a suit on. But just a woman, and a woman of color. And I accepted that as a young kid. You know, and then later I realized, oh, that's quite unusual. But so there was an education just in itself. Or I had black men on my wall. And loads of white kids like me had black men on their wall because they're in the selector, they're in the specials, you know, they're cool. You can't undervalue the importance of that, because I wouldn't have seen black people on the wall at school, and I wouldn't have seen posters of women on the walls at school. And now that's kind of almost inconceivable, although I doubt there's still big posters of women on walls at schools, but there should be.
Such a great
I don't know
point.
if that's what you meant.
No,
I'm riffing.
Was there anything while you were writing the book that surprised you, that you learned and discovered?
Well, those kind of things for sure, and discovering people that who I thought were integral to the two-tone story and had never had a voice. I think the thing when I mentioned at the beginning about how damaged individuals were by the experience, that really took me by surprise, because it's not just 3 or 4 or 5 people. There's an extraordinary amount of musicians in two-tone that are very damaged to this day because of the experiences they went through. I mean, even if you take Terry Hall, you know, Terry was abused as a schoolboy on a trip to France, as we know from a Fun Boy 3 song, by a teacher. He was his heritage was German Jewish. That's never talked about. Pauline Black was African Jewish. That's never talked about. The Beat Girl you have the two-tone man, and then you have the that we all know, the famous two-tone man, and then we have the beat girl. The beat girl, Bridget, was an artist called Bridget Bond. She was the inspiration for the design of the beat girl, and she released a record in the 60s in Jamaica. And and there's this here, and I think also in the States, you've got thousands of people that have got the beat girl as tattoos now on their arms and on their legs. Now, the interesting thing is that Bridget was born a boy, was born a man.
Oh, wow.
So that's a shocker. So transgender, I think it's hilarious that you've got these hard knock skinheads or perhaps other neo-Nazis that had their transgender beat girl tattooed on.
Fantastic.
To them. But that story's not widely out there, I don't think.
Yeah, not at all. I didn't know that. I have a question, because you said in a way that the story of Two Tone and really Jerry Dammers is almost like a tragic story, because, kind of following in this theme, I guess, but, he struggled to kind of communicate the whole vision of Two Tone. It got successful, as things will do. There was money, fame, people become famous. I think I suppose this is the story of many different movements and trends in music and stuff. Basically there's like copycat bands, and there's, people quote sell out. But I mean, my question is, in a way, can you blame anyone for just wanting to earn a living? I mean, because and hear the music, that is a goal. And I don't think it's one that could be discounted, really, No,
of course not. No, absolutely not. Why shouldn't you earn money for the thing that you most like doing? But what, interesting enough, I mean, Jerry Dammers is a socialist, and Two Tone was established as a cooperative, and of 14 members, 7 of the specials and 7 of the selector. It was meant to run as a cooperative. But the other thing I really realized when I went across the States is the British, we are defined by class, not wealth, although wealth is indelibly linked to class. But class decides all. Mm-hmm. And you're born into your class in this country, and it kind of pretty much establishes how your life will be, or how you're seen and how you're perceived, and where you removed from the school playground, who speaks to who, to which doors are opened in later life by the way you speak, by the way you dress. There's codes written into class. Now, Jerry was middle class, as were quite a lot of members of the Two Tone fraternity. Some were even upper class. Now, the working class kids in Two Tone, the important thing here is when money comes into Two Tone, depending on how your class, you have a different relationship to money. So a lot of the working class kids who suddenly get offered the riches of money. So when they first come to America, here's a limousine. Here's a hotel room with a toilet in the hotel room. Here's food. Here's free drugs. Here's free alcohol, stuff that you cannot afford because you've never experienced it. So you embrace it. But there's people within Two Tone who saw the downfall of that, but also poured scorn on people that wanted to celebrate that. And that creates massive, massive problems. So it's partly a money issue, but I would say it's more to do with what kind of an education you've had and what class that you've come from. But no, I mean, being able to play an instrument, being able to write a song is a trade. It's a trade like a plumber, an electrician, an artist, a graphic artist, whatever job you choose to name. And because it's a trade, you have a value and you should be paid for that. And so if if they want money for it, rightly so. And it's a rarefied skill, and you should be paid well for that. Within the Two Tone world, because it's got socialist values, how the distribution of that wealth works was definitely a fight that began to happen more and more within the bands and within Two Tone, and why certain people left and why other people went against Jerry Dammer's vision for how the Two Tone could be.
All right, so we're just about out of time, but I have one last question that doesn't relate to Two Tone at all. I'm just curious, are you excited for the upcoming Oasis tour?
You bet. Yeah, I never thought that would happen.
I know, yeah.
Liam and Noel coming together again for a fight. That was brilliant. I mean, I saw Oasis as supporting bands in 1993, and I saw them loads of times all the way up to Nebworth, and then again I saw them in the 2000s. I think Oasis are a great band.
Yeah.
Liam is one of the great frontmen ever in rock and roll. Noel's written some of the greatest songs ever written. I don't know what Oasis people were expecting to see, because they're not getting the original lineup, but I think it's everybody wants to see a bit of Noel and Liam, don't they? And, and that's a combustible relationship. So who knows?
Yeah.
I haven't got a ticket though, so I really hope I still get to go and see it. If it's anything like when Blur played Wembley Stadium last year, it would be incredible, because they were just something else. I don't like stadium gigs, but this changed my mind. They were brilliant. Yeah,
I only saw the film of that. I didn't get to see the actual concert because the ocean. But yeah, it's sort of.
Do you know who opened?
No.
Selector.
Oh,
no way!
Cool. Yeah, I was going to ask,
awesome.
because you can hear the influence of Two Tone all over stuff Damon Albarn does. It's really interesting.
Oh yeah, completely. Damon openly talks about the influence of Jerry Dammers and the Specials and Two Tone. Yeah, for sure. Not only in the kind of melodies that Damon writes, but more importantly in the shoes that Damon and Graham Coxon wear.
Yeah.
I really loved the new music that Blur put out last year.
Yes. Yeah, great album, wasn't it? That's a good tracks on that St. Charles Square. Yeah. That's
fantastic.
It's a good one. I was very Bowie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. I was super excited that you wrote about Ocean Color Scene, because I thought I was
really?
in the world who loved them. Yeah.
Oh wow. No, that's good to hear, Rob. I'm a big fan of Ocean Color Scene.
They played here in St. Louis on a bill with House of Love and Catherine Wheel.
Yeah.
And it was
I think I opened for them.
Yeah, it was.
Sorry,
you opened for them. What was your band, Stephanie?
The Aquanettas. I think we played with them in Long Island at like my father's place or something like that.
My father's place. Wow.
I got to figure that out now.
That was the first time that Ocean Color Scene had been to America, and they ended up going to Tower Records in New York, and the guitar player Steve Craddock Nick stole a load of CDs and got caught. And he was made to go back and give them all back and apologize before the record company threw them out of the country. He was really ashamed of himself. He thought he had blown it for the band, and he thought that was it. Yeah, they had a scream on that.
That's funny.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was the night they played here, the the election night when Clinton got elected the first time.
Really?
Yeah. And I just remember Ocean Color Scene was just kind of coming up through college radio.
Yes.
It blew up, right? And I remember the guy who was working at Polygram at the time, who was a Brit, was like, he's like, there's going to be a whole wave in the next 4 years of Britain bands. Just be ready. And I'm like, okay. And then boom, there it was. Right?
Wow. So, but when you saw Ocean Color Scene, they were playing more kind of Stone Roses influenced music, weren't they? It would have been Sway and Yesterday Today, that kind of stuff.
Last thing for you, then we'll let you go. What are you doing next, and where can people find you on social media and websites and things like that?
Just everywhere, I hope. Just write my name and see what you find, And the trouble is, actually, if you actually write Daniel Rachel into a search engine, you'll get Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz. That's who I'm competing against. So I'm sorry, I can't offer any more beauty than Rachel Weisz or any more coolness than Daniel Craig.
I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. I just want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find it on social media somehow or other on websites. And what am I writing next? It's being published in October, and I know that I've been offered an American deal already on this new book, even though I'm just doing the final edits. And it's about pop music, the swastika, and the Third Reich, and it's called "This Ain't Rock and Roll."
Oh my
Wow.
gosh, that's amazing.
Just a little light topic, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's about krautrock.
Oh, yeah. It's a comedy in 3 parts, influenced by Woody Allen and the Marx Brothers.
Well, when the book comes out in the States, will you come back on our show?
Yeah.
You betcha. Thank
Oh
you.
my God. That's so awesome. Wow. All right. So, Daniel, we're going to let you cut out. So thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Grazie mille.
Yeah. Capisci?
Go have some gelato.
Mamma mia.
Yeah. Shut up for your face.
Oh no.
Do you remember that pop record? Did you ever hear that?
Yeah. What's the matter with you? Hey, it's a
Yeah.
nicer place. What do you think you do? Shut up for your face.
And he's Australian, which makes that record even more hilarious.
Really?
Oh, my
Yeah, that guy's Australian.
Wow.
Yeah, so
All right. So we are going to take a very quick break and we'll be right back with more of our show. So don't go anywhere.
Holy podcast! It's Howdy Mike Gordon.
Howdy!
What are you doing here, Mike?
Well, Drew, I'm here to talk Batman 66, of course.
Batman 66?
That's right, folks. Join Drew Leiter and I every Wednesday for the Bat Chums podcast. We will discuss, recap, and review the Batman 60 series episode by episode.
Same bat time, same bat channel. Come on, Bat Chum. We don't have one moment to lose.
Don't worry, the worst is yet to come.
Okay. We are back.
Wow, that was wonderful.
God,
yeah, that was great.
I think that's
Great
one of
guy.
the best conversations that we've had because it wasn't only about the music. I mean, there's nothing wrong with just talking about the music, but it got into so many things related to the music.
I agree.
Also, if you get a chance, and we could probably repost this, he did a fantastic Spotify playlist for the book. So if you are wondering what Two Tone Records is and what the sound is, it's a fantastic playlist.
We could put that in our liner notes. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. All right. So we got a couple of minutes. Let's talk about our picks of the week. And Stephanie, I want to start with you because you had something really, really cool happen this past week.
Yes. We have had my friend Olivia Serafini-Soli on this show before, talking about her documentary called Endless Calls for Fame, the story of the New Rising Suns. And since we've spoken to Olivia, her movie has gotten picked up by Gravitas and is now available on Apple TV, Amazon, and all these other streamers. So please, first of all, go watch it. It is amazing. But
it is such a great film.
It's fantastic. We went to the premiere, like a press screening of it in the city at the Village East Theater. And it was I've never been to one of these. It was so fun. There was like people taking pictures everywhere. And like, there was first of all, the film was packed. Like it was just a packed theater. So great reception. A really great Q&A at the end and a fantastic after party. Good going, Olivia. But I highly recommend everybody seeing this movie. It's a wonderful story about my friend's band, the New Rising Suns, their formation from out of the sort of hardcore punk scene of the New York City scene, then sort of through the post Nirvana scene, I guess, that happened. The story of their getting signed, making their album not coming out, and then like 20 years later having a release of their album on Arctic Rodeo, and just what they've been doing since then too. It's a story of a lot of things. Them, of course, the scene, the 90s music scene in general. And it's a really, like a human emotion story as well. There's so many elements to the movie.
And I think we need to, in case somebody doesn't remember or never heard the original episode that we did with Olivia, we need to remind people that Stephanie, our very own Stephanie Seymour, is in the film. And that's exciting. And I also want to say that we are going to have Olivia back on the show very soon. So watch out for that, because there's so much to talk about that's happened over the past year with getting the film onto streaming platforms and all the press that's gone on around the release of this film. So I can't wait to have her back on.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
All right, Rob, what else? What you got, bud?
I hate this because there's so much. I was pleasantly surprised this week to wake up and find out that Matt Berninger from The National, band that I love so much, has a new record actually called Get Sunk, and the first single, Bonnet of Pins, is on it, is out. And so look for that. I'm super excited about that. And then also at the same time, literally within minutes of each other, the new record from Dean Wareham from Galaxy 500, who is one of my favorite bands in the entire world. And I know Bob likes them too, likes Luna and them as well. But he has an album called That's the Price of Loving Me, produced by Kramer. So he's back making a record with Kramer, who is sort of the seminal producer of the 90s and the early 2000s. If you couldn't get Steve Albini, you got Kramer. So that's out, and I'm super excited about that. And then I am very, very, very excited about this band called Mama that I cannot wait until Stephanie hears them. Mama. Yeah, it is the closest.
That's my
yeah, they're great. They're on polyvinyl. It's called Welcome to My Blue Sky, and the first single is I Want You Fever. It is going to be the catchiest song of the year. It's a guaranteed earworm. Yeah,
interesting.
They are.
Okay.
If you like things like the Go-Go's or Joan Jett or Sleater Kinney, this is kind
Stephanie
of
likes those things.
We like all these things.
I've been talking about this band to Stephanie for like 2 years.
Okay.
Have you heard Mama yet? Yeah. I'm actually going to have somebody send you the records. That is how excited I am for you to hear them. I'm going to send you the records. Yeah.
Okay.
But they're fantastic. And also Sharon Van Etten, who is fantastic. Back when I used to be on the real terrestrial radio, she did a session for my show on KDHX, so I'm a big fan. But she has sort of done the opposite of what a lot of singer-songwriters are doing, where they put out albums just by themselves. She's like, I've got my backing band. I'm going to make a whole record with the backing band and bill them. So it's Sharon Van Etten and The Attachment Theory. That's the album. And it's basically, a rock record. She's been doing a lot of singer-songwriting stuff for years, and she's like, I want to make a rock and roll record. So she did.
Cool.
And that's pretty fantastic. And I'm reading right now, kind of music adjacent, a book called Paradise Bronx by Ian Fraser. It's a history of the Bronx in New York. And a large chunk of that covers sort of the musical legacy of the Bronx from, jazz and blues and the 20s and swing all the way up through the birth of hip hop. So that's kind of what I've been doing this week.
Fabulous.
So I have 5 things this week. Oh my gosh. And so I'll do it as quickly as I can. There's a guy that I really love. His name is Joe, and it's spelled D-J-O, just like Django. It's spelled Joe. His real name is Joe Keery. He's the guy who plays Steve on Stranger Things, but he's had a really solid music career. I've talked about him before on our show. He's had a really strong music career since 2019. He's got a number of things that have been out. And he's got a new album. He's been dropping some singles lately that I haven't really, because some of the things that we've had going on, I haven't been able to talk much about. But he's got a new album coming out in like 2 weeks called The Crux. And I think he is so fantastic. But I just discovered yesterday that he is not the only Stranger Things cast member with a music career, because one of his co-stars is just now launching a music career, and that is Finn Wolfhard. He's got a new single out called Choose the Ladder, and his new album, Happy Birthday, is going to be out in June. And the new single is so fun. It's this great, catchy rock pop song, and it's just great. It's so good. I'm really enjoying listening to it. So check that out. And here's the thing that you might not expect to come from me, but the new Lady Gaga album is
I want to get that.
Fucking good.
I am waiting to hear this. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not usually a fan of this like over processed mechanical kind of dancey stuff. I like more organic things, but this record is so good. I mean, the songwriting on it is just fantastic. Every track on it just punches you in the face. It's so good. There's just a lot of great tracks on it. My favorite one is Killer. And there's just every song on it is so good. The last 2 songs I don't really care much for, but the first like 13 are fantastic.
Did you see her on Saturday Night Live, by the way?
That was my item number 4.
Good.
She was on SNL last week and was amazing.
Yeah.
And they did Abracadabra, which is the new single, and Killer, which I thought Killer was a fantastic performance.
It was.
And it may be my favorite performance this season on SNL. I do a ranking every year, and I'm pretty sure unless something really incredible happens in the next few weeks, she's going to be the top of this year's list.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I want to share is that Paramount Plus has just released a whole slew of old VH1 and MTV music shows and it's not a complete run. There's a lot of things not there, but a whole slew of episodes of Storytellers, Crossroads, and Unplugged. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, there is some great music on those shows. And I have been diving into them and just watching episodes that I haven't seen in a long time and watching some that I've never seen. I've never watched the Chris Isaac episode. It was so good. Why have I not seen it before? It was wonderful. So if you love music, which I'm sure you do, or you wouldn't be listening to shows like this one, go to Paramount Plus and check out all this great stuff that I haven't seen on television in ages. We are going to be back in 2 weeks. We're going to be doing, so, we're in 2025 now, which means a whole new round of anniversaries to celebrate. So next time we are going to be doing our show on the music of 1975. The funky year 1975. I can't wait because there's a lot of like really big bands that put out seminal albums in 1975 and a lot of things that really get launched, like the whole disco scene really starts to explode at this point. So there's a lot to talk about for 1975. All right, super quick. Where can listeners find more of each one of you? Rob, kick it off.
You can find me on Blue Sky and Facebook and the Instagram under my name. You can find me on Louder Than War Radio with a show called Antics. That's on Mondays, 6 to 8 Greenwich time or 12 to 2 Central, 1 to 3 Eastern. Also on Wednesday, you can find me on Brooklyn's very own The Face Radio. That is going to be 5 to 7 Central, 6 to 8 Eastern. And then now you can find me on Saturdays, 2 times on Saturdays. Especially if you live on the left coast, you guys have been complaining you couldn't hear anything. I'm doing a show for Eardrum Buzz Radio called The Comforts of Madness, which is named after a book and a Pale Saint song. And that show airs at 8 a.m. Central, and again at 8 p.m. Central on Saturday. So each show repeats. And because I'm busy, there are 2 of those a month. So I'm only doing 2 shows. Each show repeats on 2 weekends.
Okay, Stephanie.
Okay, you can find me at Stephanie Seymour Music on Facebook. There_R_birds on Instagram. You can find me on Bandcamp under my name. I also have a website called therearebirds.com. And then you can find me on Spotify and all the streaming platforms everywhere.
And for me, you can go to cosmiccreative.com. KOZMIC creative.com. All right. We will be back in 2 weeks with our show about 1975. So join us then. And everybody have a great week and keep rocking on.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.